"My father said you needed a wife," she whispered, and I said he was right. "My father said you needed a wife," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the ocean outside his study window. She stood trembling, dripping rain onto the imported Persian rug, looking nothing like the polished heiress he expected. Duilio Albuquerque turned from the fire, the crystal tumbler in his hand catching the flickering light. He took in her torn dress, the defiance in her tear-streaked face. His gaze, usually cold and unreadable, softened imperceptibly. He set the glass down with a heavy thud. "And I said," he murmured, crossing the room until he was inches away. He was right. The Albuquerque estate, a sprawling mansion perched on the cliffs of Malibu, usually offered Duilio a sense of commanding isolation. Tonight, it felt like a prison. At 34, Duilio was the ruthless CEO of Albuquerque Holdings, a man who had built an empire by leaving his emotions at the door. He was known for his sharp mind and an even sharper tongue, a billionaire who collected companies the way others collected art. But his latest acquisition, a critical merger with Bonomo Shipping, had hit a snag. The snag wasn't financial, it was personal. Camel Bonomo, the aging patriarch of the shipping dynasty, was a man of old-world sensibilities. He didn't trust spreadsheets. He trusted blood. During their last tense meeting in Camel's opulent mahogany-panelled office, the old man had leaned across the desk, his roomy eyes sharp. "I won't hand my life's work to a man who has no anchor," Camille had rasped. "You are brilliant, Duilio, but you are a solitary shark. A man without a family is a man who can walk away from anything. I need a guarantee." "A guarantee of what, Camille?" Duilio had countered, his voice smooth, though his jaw tightened. "Commitment. Stability. I need to know you won't sell my fleet the moment the market turns. Marry my daughter. Provide an heir. Do that and the merger is yours." It was an outrageous demand, even in their cutthroat world. Duilio had laughed, a short, harsh sound, assuming it was a bluff. But Camel hadn't smiled. He had meant it. Now, pacing his study, the rhythmic crash of the waves doing nothing to soothe his agitation, Duilio weighed his options. The merger would make him untouchable. It was the crown jewel of his career. But marriage? To a woman he had never met? He knew of her, of course, Giannina Olsen. She had taken her mother's maiden name years ago in a desperate bid for privacy. The tabloids occasionally caught glimpses of her, a shadowy figure attending charity galas, her blonde hair pulled back tightly, her smile polite but distant. She was known to be quiet, unassuming, the exact opposite of her boisterous, overbearing father. Duilio stopped by the window, staring out into the churning blackness of the ocean. He didn't need love. He needed Bonomo Shipping. If a marriage of convenience was the price, he would pay it. He would treat it like any other contract. Outline the terms, sign the papers, and maintain a polite, detached professionalism. The sudden, frantic pounding on his heavy oak front door shattered the silence. Duilio frowned. It was past midnight and a storm was raging. He bypassed the intercom, his instincts honed by years of corporate warfare kicking in, and walked swiftly to the foyer. He swung the heavy door open. Standing on his porch, silhouetted by the flashes of lightning, was a woman. She was soaked to the bone. Her evening gown, which might have once been elegant silk, now clung to her in wet, ruined patches, the hem torn and muddy. Her blonde hair hung in stringy, damp strands around her pale face. She was shivering violently, her arms wrapped around herself. It took Duilio a moment to recognize her from the grainy paparazzi photos. It was Giannina. Before he could speak, before he could demand to know why Camel Bonomo's daughter was standing on his doorstep looking like she'd crawled out of a shipwreck, she spoke. "My father said you needed a wife," she whispered, her voice trembling but her gaze remarkably steady. Duilio was taken aback. This wasn't the cowed, obedient daughter he had expected. There was a desperate fire in her eyes, a defiance that intrigued him despite himself. He ushered her inside, the wind howling as he shoved the heavy door shut against the storm. She stood in his immaculate foyer, a chaotic, dripping mess, looking around with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "He sent you?" Duilio asked, his voice low, cautious. "No," Giannina said, her teeth chattering. "He doesn't know I'm here. He locked me in my room after our argument about the arrangement. I climbed out the window." Duilio raised an eyebrow. The image of this supposedly meek woman scaling down a mansion wall in an evening gown was jarring. "Why?" She met his gaze, and for the first time he saw the deep, bruised weariness in her eyes. Because I need to escape him. He's controlled every aspect of my life. If I marry you on his terms, I'm just trading one cage for another. And you think marrying me on your terms will be different? Duilio challenged, crossing his arms. I don't know, she admitted, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. But at least it would be my choice. He wants to sell me to you for a merger. I'm offering you a different deal. What kind of deal? Marry me, Giannina said, stepping closer, the scent of rain and desperation clinging to her. Give me the protection of your name and your resources to keep him away from me. In return, I'll sign whatever prenup you want, play the perfect wife for the cameras, and ensure the merger goes through smoothly. No emotional attachments, just a business arrangement. Duilio stared at her. She was offering him exactly what he wanted, the merger without the messy entanglement of a real marriage, but the raw vulnerability beneath her tough facade caught him off guard. She was terrified, yet she was fighting back. He realized then that he didn't just want the merger anymore. He was inexplicably drawn to this woman who had braved a storm to rewrite the rules of her own sale. He turned away, walking toward the study, motioning for her to follow. He poured a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and offered it to her. She took it with shaking hands, the glass clinking against her teeth as she took a hesitant sip. He watched her, calculating, evaluating. Then he set his own empty glass down with a heavy thud. And I said, he murmured, crossing the room until he was inches away, looking down into her wide, startled eyes. He was right. The morning light, harsh and unforgiving, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Duilio's office in downtown Los Angeles. Giannina sat across from him, engulfed in one of his oversized cashmere sweaters, a stark contrast to the sleek, hyper-modern environment. She looked small, but the defiant spark from the night before remained. Between them lay a thick stack of legal documents. Christoph Paulson, Duilio's longtime lawyer and closest confidant, sat at the end of the table, his sharp eyes flicking between the two of them. "This is highly irregular, Duilio," Christoph said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. "Camille expects a traditional courtship, a public announcement, the whole dog and pony show. If we bypass him entirely..." "Camille wants an anchor," Duilio interrupted smoothly, his gaze fixed on Giannina. "He'll get one. We'll present him with a fait accompli. A signed marriage certificate is hard to argue with." Giannina shifted uncomfortably. "Will he try to retaliate?" Duilio offered a tight, predatory smile. "Let him try. Once the ink is dry on the merger and the marriage license, I'll hold all the cards. But first, we need to ensure our own arrangement is ironclad." He slid the documents toward her. "Christoph has drafted the prenuptial agreement based on our conversation last night. You get a substantial monthly allowance, a property of your choosing after 3 years, and complete financial independence from your father immediately. In return, you attend public events as my wife, support the company's image, and we maintain separate bedrooms." Giannina skimmed the dense legalese. It was exactly what she had asked for. A gilded cage, perhaps, but one where she held the key. It was a cold, transactional document, devoid of any warmth or promise of a shared life. It was perfect. "And what happens if one of us wants out?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Christoph leaned forward. "There's a dissolution clause. After 5 years, either party can initiate a quiet divorce with a predetermined financial settlement. If a child is involved, the terms change significantly." Giannina's head snapped up. "A child?" Duilio's expression was unreadable. "Camille mentioned an heir. It might be necessary to secure his total cooperation." A heavy silence descended on the room. The idea of bringing a child into this sterile, calculated arrangement felt abhorrent to Giannina. "No," she said firmly, surprising even herself with the strength of her voice. "No children. That wasn't part of my deal." Duilio watched her for a long moment, his dark eyes analysing her. He saw the panic rising in her chest, the sudden, fierce protectiveness over a hypothetical child. "Fine," he said abruptly. "Strike the clause, Christoph. No children." Christoph sighed, making a notation on the contract. "You're making this unnecessarily complicated, Duilio." "I'm making it agreeable to my future wife," Duilio countered softly, though his tone held a warning. Giannina looked at him, startled. It was the first time he had referred to her as his wife, even hypothetically. It sent a strange jolt through her. He was ruthless, manipulative, and terrifyingly powerful, yet he had just yielded to her demand without a fight. She picked up the heavy pen. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name. Giannina Olson, next to Duilio Albuquerque. With each stroke, she severed the ties to her father and bound herself to a man who was an enigma, wrapped in bespoke suits and cold ambition. "It's done," she said, pushing the papers back. Duilio stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "We leave for Vegas in an hour. We'll be married by noon. Then we pay your father a visit." The flight on Duilio's private jet was tense and silent. Giannina changed into a simple, elegant white dress that one of Duilio's assistants had procured. She stared out the window at the clouds, the reality of what she had done crashing down on her. She was marrying a stranger to escape a monster. The ceremony at the drive-through chapel was brief and surreal. The officiant, dressed as Elvis, mumbled through the vows while Duilio held her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and surprisingly reassuring. When he slipped the massive diamond ring onto her finger, it felt heavy, a tangible symbol of her new imprisonment. "You may kiss the bride," Elvis drawled. Giannina froze. They hadn't discussed this. Duilio turned to her, his expression unreadable. He cupped her face, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. He leaned in, and his lips brushed hers. It was a fleeting, chaste kiss, meant entirely for show, yet Giannina felt a sudden, unexpected spark. It was over before it began, leaving her breathless and confused. They stepped back onto the scorching Vegas pavement as Mr. and Mrs. Albuquerque. "Ready?" Duilio asked, his voice returning to its usual cool tenor. "As I'll ever be," Giannina replied, adjusting the enormous rock on her finger. The confrontation with Camel was explosive. They arrived at the Bonomo estate just as he was demanding his security team find his missing daughter. When Duilio walked in, his hand possessively resting on Giannina's lower back, Camel's face turned a mottled purple. "What is the meaning of this?" the old man roared, slamming his cane against the floor. "We're married, Camel," Duilio announced, his voice ringing with authority. "The merger goes forward immediately, on my terms." Camel looked at Giannina, his eyes blazing with fury. "You insolent little—" He lunged forward, raising his cane. Before Giannina could react, Duilio moved with terrifying speed. He stepped between them, catching the cane mid-air with one hand. His eyes, usually calm and calculated, were wide with dark, suppressed rage. "Never raise a hand to my wife," Duilio hissed, his voice dangerously low. "If you ever threaten her again, I won't just walk away from the merger. I will dismantle Bonomo shipping piece by piece until there's nothing left but dust. Do you understand me?" Camille faltered, the fight draining from him. He stared at Duilio, then at Giannina, and finally nodded, defeated. As they walked back to the car, Giannina felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation. For the first time in her life, she felt protected. She looked at Duilio, her fake husband, the ruthless shark. He had defended her, not because he loved her, but because she was his, and God help her. A small part of her thrilled at the thought's heart. 3 months into the marriage, the arrangement was functioning with cold precision. They lived in the Malibu estate, their lives orbiting each other but rarely colliding. Giannina spent her days transforming one of the empty guest rooms into an art studio, finding solace in the chaotic smears of paint that contrasted with the rigid order of Duilio's world. Duilio worked punishing hours, returning late, often retreating to his study with a glass of scotch. Their public appearances were choreographed perfection. They attended charity galas and corporate dinners, portraying the image of a powerful, united front. Duilio was always attentive in public, his hand on her waist, his smiles calculated. Giannina played her part flawlessly, offering polite conversation and dazzling smiles for the cameras. But behind closed doors, they were polite strangers. The turning point came on the night of the Albuquerque Holdings annual gala. It was the social event of the season, a glittering affair held at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Giannina wore a stunning emerald green gown that clung to her curves, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon. As she descended the grand staircase, she caught Duilio watching her. His gaze lingered, a flash of something unreadable passing through his dark eyes before he masked it with his usual cool demeanor. He offered his arm. "You look acceptable," he said softly. Giannina bristled, though she knew it was a compliment in his language. Don't overwhelm me with your praise, darling. He shot her a sharp look, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards. It was a rare glimpse of amusement, and it unsettled her. The ballroom was packed with the city's elite. Giannina navigated the crowd with practiced ease, fielding questions about the merger and her new role as Mrs. Albuquerque. She was standing near the champagne fountain, taking a brief respite, when she heard a familiar, unwelcome voice. Well, if it isn't the runaway bride. Giannina stiffened. She turned to face Megan Massey, a prominent socialite and, more importantly, Duilio's ex-fiancée. Megan was stunning, a sharp-featured brunette with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Their engagement had ended abruptly a year ago, the details fiercely guarded by both parties. "Megan," Giannina said, keeping her tone even. "It's been a while." "Not long enough, clearly," Megan sneered, looking Giannina up and down dismissively. "I must say, I was surprised when Duilio married you. You're hardly his type. He usually prefers women with a bit more spine." Giannina felt her face flush, the old insecurities her father had drilled into her threatening to surface. Perhaps he realized he needed something different. Megan laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Oh, please, we all know why he married you. Bonomo shipping. Don't kid yourself, Giannina. You're just a line item on his balance sheet." The words hit their mark, stinging with undeniable truth. Giannina knew it was a business arrangement, but hearing it weaponized by this woman was humiliating. She opened her mouth to retort, but the words died in her throat. Suddenly, a warm, heavy hand settled on her bare shoulder. "Is there a problem here?" Duilio's voice, smooth as silk and hard as steel, cut through the tension. He stepped beside Giannina, his physical presence imposing. He didn't look at Megan. His eyes were focused entirely on his wife. Megan's sneer faltered. "Duilio, darling, we were just catching up." I see," Duilio said, his tone icy. He finally turned his gaze to Megan, and the disdain was palpable. "I suggest you find someone else to catch up with, Megan. My wife and I were just leaving." He didn't wait for a response. He guided Giannina away, his grip firm but gentle. They walked through the crowded ballroom, the sea of people parting for them. When they reached the quiet of the terrace, overlooking the illuminated gardens, Giannina finally pulled away, her anger flaring. "I didn't need you to rescue me," she snapped, wrapping her arms around herself against the sudden chill. Duilio leaned against the stone balustrade, loosening his tie. "You looked like you were about to bolt." "I was handling it by letting her insult you." "She only said what's true," Giannina countered bitterly. "I am just a line item. This whole marriage is a transaction." Duilio stared at her, the shadows masking his expression. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. "Is that all you think this is?" he asked quietly. "What else could it be?" she demanded, the frustration of the past 3 months bubbling over. "We live in the same house, but we barely speak. We sleep in separate rooms. The only time you touch me is when there's a camera pointed at us." He pushed off the balustrade, taking a slow step toward her. The air between them suddenly felt charged, dangerous. "You're the one who dictated the terms, Giannina," he reminded her, his voice low. "Separate bedrooms, no emotional attachments. And you agreed to them." "Because I didn't think you could handle anything else," he said, taking another step. He was close now. Close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne, sharp and masculine. "You came to me terrified, broken by your father. I gave you what you asked for. Safety. Space." Giannina looked up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw a flicker of something raw in his eyes, something he usually kept locked away. And what if," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "what if I don't want space anymore?" The words hung in the air, reckless and unplanned. Duilio went utterly still. He searched her face, looking for deception, for hesitation. He found none. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out, his hand wrapping gently around the nape of her neck. His thumb stroked her jawline, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. "Are you sure about that, Giannina?" he murmured, his face inches from hers. "Because if we cross this line, there's no going back to polite strangers." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. The cold, calculated contract they had signed suddenly felt insignificant. "I'm sure," she whispered. His mouth came down on hers, not with the performative restraint of their wedding day, but with a fierce, demanding hunger that swept away all her carefully constructed defenses. It was a kiss that shattered the transactional nature of their marriage, replacing it with something infinitely more complicated and infinitely more dangerous. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Duilio's master suite, casting long, golden geometric shadows across the tangled silk sheets. For the first time since she had arrived at the Malibu estate, dripping wet and desperate, Giannina woke up somewhere other than the isolated guest wing. She lay perfectly still, the rhythmic sound of the ocean waves temporarily masked by the steady, deep breathing of the man beside her. Duilio lay on his stomach, one heavy, muscular arm draped possessively across her waist, pinning her to him even in sleep. The memory of the previous night, the explosive kiss on the terrace, the silent, urgent walk up the grand staircase, and the profound shedding of their carefully constructed barriers flooded her mind, bringing a hot flush to her cheeks. It hadn't just been a physical surrender, it had felt like a claiming, a total demolition of the transactional contract they had signed in Christoph's sterile office. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Giannina slipped out from under his heavy arm. She gathered his discarded white dress shirt from the floor, pulling it over her shoulders. It smelled of expensive cologne, scotch, and him. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Pacific. The world felt terrifyingly new. She had traded the cage of her father's tyranny for the velvet-lined trap of Duilio Albuquerque's world, only to realize she was falling irrevocably in love with her captor. "You're thinking too loudly," a rough, sleep-gravelled voice murmured from the bed. Giannina turned. Duilio was propped up on one elbow, the sheets pooling around his waist, exposing the sculpted lines of his chest and the faint silver scars of a life lived relentlessly. His dark eyes, usually so cold and unreadable, were tracing her silhouette against the morning light with a raw, undisguised hunger. "I was thinking about the contract," she said softly, clutching the lapels of his shirt. "Clause 4, separate bedrooms." A slow, predatory smile touched the corners of his mouth. He threw the sheets back and stood, entirely unself-conscious in his nakedness, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate steps. Contracts can be renegotiated, or torn up entirely. He reached her, his hands sliding down her arms to capture her wrists, pulling her gently against his chest. "There are no separate bedrooms anymore, Giannina. You crossed the line last night. I intend to make sure you never cross back." Before she could process the possessive weight of his words, his mouth was on hers again, a demanding kiss that tasted of morning and fierce possession. But daylight brought the harsh reality of their world. By 8 o'clock, the tender intimacy of the dawn was gone, replaced by the razor-sharp CEO. Duilio was dressed in a charcoal bespoke suit, his phone glued to his ear as he paced the marble kitchen, barking orders at his executive team. The Bonomo merger, despite the marriage, was proving to be a logistical nightmare. "I don't care what the board says, Christoph. Freeze those assets," Duilio snapped, pouring a cup of black coffee. He caught Giannina's eye and offered a brief, apologetic nod before turning away. "Get Milo on the line. If Camel thinks he can bleed the subsidiary dry before the final ink is dry, he's deeply mistaken." Giannina watched him leave for the city, feeling a sudden, sharp ache of loneliness. The estate was too large, too quiet. Needing to escape the echoing silence of the mansion, she ordered a driver to take her down the coast to a small, eclectic arts district she had researched. She found herself wandering into a sunlit bohemian gallery that smelled strongly of linseed oil and fresh espresso. The walls were covered in chaotic, brilliant, abstract pieces that made her fingers itch for her own brushes. "Too much cadmium red, isn't it?" a vibrant voice called out. Giannina turned to see a woman in paint-splattered overalls, her wild curly hair tied up in a brightly coloured silk scarf. She had an infectious, easy smile. "Actually," Giannina ventured, stepping closer to the canvas, "I think the red ground's the piece. It's the negative space on the left that feels a bit unresolved. It lacks tension." The woman's eyes widened in genuine surprise and appreciation. She wiped her hands on a rag and extended one. "I'm Jaylin Josephson. I own this chaotic little corner of the world, and you actually know what you're talking about, which is a rare commodity around here." "Giannina," she replied, shaking the woman's hand, omitting her infamous last name. For the next 2 hours, the two women talked over coffee in the back of the studio. Giannina, starved for genuine connection outside the suffocating spheres of her father and her husband, found herself opening up to Jaylin about her own hidden passion for painting, the secret studio back at the estate, and the paralyzing fear of showing her work to the world. "You're hiding," Jaylin observed astutely, peering at Giannina over the rim of her mug. "Not just your art. You. Who are you hiding from, Giannina?" The question struck a nerve, ringing with a terrifying truth. She had hidden from her father, and now perhaps she was hiding in the shadow of Duilio's immense presence. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in the glass and steel monolith of Albuquerque Holdings, Duilio was introduced to his newest headache. Sitting across from him and Christoph Paulson was Milo Thomas. Milo was a corporate fixer, a man brought in to smooth over the jagged edges of hostile takeovers. He was impeccably dressed, dangerously charming, and possessed a smile that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. "The Bonomo executives are stalling, Duilio," Milo said smoothly, reviewing a tablet. "Camille is playing a dangerous game. He's shifting capital into offshore accounts, trying to devalue the maritime assets before the final quarterly audit. He's trying to make you pay a premium for a hollowed-out company." Duilio steepled his fingers, his jaw tight. "He's testing my resolve. He wants to see if I'll break the marriage to save the bottom line." Milo chuckled, a sound devoid of humour. "Well, the word on the street after the gala is that the marriage is far from just a paper transaction. Word of advice, Duilio. Don't let the old man see that you care about the girl. If Camel figures out your wife is your weakness, he won't just bleed the company. He'll use her to break you." Duilio's eyes darkened to pitch. "My wife is off limits. Handle the assets, Milo. Leave Giannina out of your calculations." As Milo left the office, Christoph shot Duilio a worried glance. "He's right, you know. You're exposed, and Camel Bonomo is a man who thrives on the exposure of others." 2 weeks bled into a month, and the atmosphere at the Malibu estate shifted into a beautiful, agonizing tension. By night, Duilio and Giannina were inseparable, caught in a whirlwind of breathless passion and whispered secrets in the dark. Duilio, the solitary shark, had become fiercely, almost terrifyingly devoted to her. He anticipated her needs, traced the contours of her face as if memorizing a masterpiece, and looked at her with a heat that made her knees weak. But by day, the corporate war raged. Duilio was under immense pressure, the Bonomo merger bleeding capital due to mysterious internal leaks and bureaucratic sabotage. He grew distant, distracted, his phone constantly buzzing with frantic messages from Christoph and Milo. Giannina, sensing his withdrawal, threw herself entirely into her art, sneaking canvases down to Jaylin's gallery under the pseudonym G.O. Jaylin had insisted on entering Giannina's work into an upcoming underground exhibition. It was a terrifying prospect, but it gave Giannina a profound sense of purpose. She was building something of her own, completely untouched by the Bonomo legacy or Albuquerque money. The fragile bubble they had built fractured the night Duilio decided to host a strategic dinner party at the estate. The guest list was small but vital: Christoph, Milo Thomas, and a handful of key investors. But when the doorbell rang, it wasn't just the executives who walked into the grand foyer. Milo strolled in, offering a charismatic smile, with Megan Massey draped on his arm. Giannina froze at the top of the stairs, her grip tightening on the mahogany banister. Megan wore a sleek, blood-red dress that screamed defiance, her eyes instantly locking onto Giannina with a familiar, predatory gleam. Duilio, standing by the bar, went perfectly still. His eyes snapped to Milo. "Explain!" he demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, hushed register. Milo raised his hands in mock surrender. "Strictly business, Duilio. Megan's PR firm has just been retained by the Bonomo board to handle the public transition of the merger," Camel insisted. "I couldn't exactly uninvite our new head of public relations, could I?" Duilio looked as though he wanted to physically throw Milo through the plate glass window, but the arrival of the investors forced him to mask his fury beneath a veneer of icy politeness. Dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Megan sat directly across from Giannina, offering backhanded compliments wrapped in poisoned honey. "The house looks so lived in now, Giannina," Megan purred over the duck confit. "Duilio always preferred a minimalist aesthetic, so clinical, but I suppose you've added your own little rustic touches." "I find a house without warmth is just a museum," Giannina replied, her voice remarkably steady, though beneath the table her hands were trembling. Milo, seated to her left, leaned in close, pouring her more wine. I agree with Giannina. Warmth is everything. You must be lonely out here all day while Duilio is busy fighting your father's ghost. His gaze lingered on her collarbone a second too long, a blatant display of flirtation that made Giannina's skin crawl. From the head of the table, the air around Duilio dropped 10 degrees. The crystal wine glass in his hand looked dangerously close to shattering under his grip. My wife's schedule is entirely her own, Milo, Duilio said, his voice slicing through the dining room chatter like a scythe. And she is never lonely. When coffee and brandy were served on the terrace, Megan cornered Giannina near the fire pit. The sea breeze whipped Megan's dark hair around her sharp face. You think you've won him, don't you? Megan whispered, stepping uncomfortably close. You think because he took you to his bed? You're special. I don't care to have this conversation with you, Megan, Giannina said, turning to leave. Megan caught her arm, her nails digging into Giannina's skin. He's a machine, Giannina. He assesses value, acquires the asset, and the moment it becomes a liability, he discards it. Do you know why he really broke our engagement? Because my father's company hit a downward trend. I was no longer a profitable alliance. What do you think is going to happen to you when Camel finally tanks this merger? He'll drop you so fast your head will spin. Let go of my wife, a voice thundered from the glass doors. Duilio strode across the terrace, his face a mask of absolute fury. He shoved Megan's hand away from Giannina, placing himself solidly between the two women. If you ever touch her again, or speak to her again, I will personally ensure your firm is blacklisted from every corporation on this coast. Get out of my house, Megan sneered, backing away. You're losing your touch, Duilio, letting a little stray ruin your empire. She turned on her heel and walked back inside, gathering Milo as she left. When the house was finally empty, the silence was deafening. Duilio stood by the fireplace, breathing heavily, running a hand through his dark hair. Giannina watched him, the poison Megan had planted taking root in her chest. Is it true? She asked, her voice echoing in the vast, empty room. Duilio turned to her, a frown creasing his brow. Is what true? That you discard people when they are no longer profitable. If my father ruins this merger, if I am no longer the key to Bonomo shipping, what happens to me, Duilio? Does the dissolution clause come back into play? Duilio closed the distance between them, grasping her shoulders gently but firmly. His eyes were blazing, desperate. Don't listen to her. Don't let them infect this. What we've built in the last month has nothing to do with Camel, or the merger, or the damn company. But it started as a transaction, she cried, a tear escaping down her cheek. And right now, your company is bleeding because of me, because of my father. How long until I become a liability? Duilio pulled her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair. You are the only thing in my life that isn't a transaction, Giannina. I would burn the entire empire to the ground before I let you go. Do you hear me? His kiss was desperate, tasting of fear and whiskey, and she clung to him, wanting desperately to believe the man holding her over the monster her father and the world claimed him to be. The night of the underground art exhibition arrived with an unseasonable downpour, mirroring the night Giannina had first arrived at Duilio's door. The gallery in the arts district was transformed, dimly lit and buzzing with an eclectic crowd of critics, buyers and artists. Giannina stood in the corner, clutching a glass of sparkling water, her heart hammering against her ribs. 5 of her large-scale abstract canvases hung on the feature wall under the spotlight, credited only to G.O. They were raw, visceral explosions of colour, depictions of her rage, her imprisonment, and ultimately her fierce, terrifying awakening with Duilio. She checked her phone for the 100th time. Duilio had promised to be there. He had promised to slip out of a board meeting and celebrate her secret triumph. But it was already an hour past his expected arrival, and his texts had abruptly stopped. Across town in the Albuquerque Holdings skyscraper, Duilio was trapped in a nightmare. The boardroom was a war zone. Christoph was pacing the length of the table, paper strewn everywhere. Milo Thomas sat opposite them, looking entirely too calm for the catastrophe unfolding. $50 million gone in a matter of hours, Christoph yelled, slamming a file down. Transferred through a dozen shell corporations straight out of the Bonomo subsidiary accounts. It's a classic bleed-out, Duilio. Camel has triggered a poison pill. Duilio stared at the financial data on the screen, his mind racing. He checked his watch. He was missing Giannina's opening. He had to end this. He looked at the routing numbers, tracking the digital footprints. He had spent his life dismantling corporate structures, analyzing patterns. His eyes narrowed. He looked up at Milo. Milo's calm facade was perfect, but his thumb was tapping a rapid, anxious rhythm against his phone case. "These aren't Camel's standard routing protocols," Duilio said slowly, his voice deadly quiet. "Camel uses traditional offshore havens, Cayman, Swiss. These are routed through Eastern European tech shells. The same exact shells, Milo, that you used to liquidate the Vance acquisition 3 years ago." The colour drained from Christoph's face. He looked at Milo. Milo stopped tapping. The charming mask slipped, revealing a cold, calculating mercenary beneath. "Camel pays incredibly well, Duilio. Much better than a standard consultant fee. He wanted to ensure that if you didn't bow to him, you'd absorb so much toxic debt that your own board would oust you. He hates you, Duilio. But more importantly, he hates that his daughter chose you over him." Rage, blinding and absolute, coursed through Duilio's veins. He stood up, towering over the table. "Christoph, call security, have this son of a bitch escorted out, and freeze every asset tied to his name. Contact the feds. I want him indicted for corporate espionage by morning." Duilio grabbed his coat and bolted for the private elevator. He had to get to Giannina. He had to warn her that her father was moving in for the kill, using everyone around them. Back at the gallery, the crowd had thinned slightly. Jalen squeezed Giannina's shoulder. "They sold G, all 5 of them, to a private collector in New York. You did it." Giannina smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She felt a hollow ache. The most important moment of her true life, and the man she loved wasn't there to share it. "Looking for your husband, Giannina." Giannina turned. Megan Massey stepped out from behind a large sculpture, a sleek trench coat belted tightly around her waist. She held a manila envelope in her manicured hand, her lips curved into a cruel, triumphant smile. "What are you doing here, Megan?" Giannina asked, taking a step back, her protective instincts flaring. "Oh, I have a keen interest in modern art," Megan said breezily, "and an even keener interest in the truth. I noticed Duilio wasn't here, too busy trying to stop his empire from collapsing, I suppose. It's such a shame. He really thought he could outsmart Camille." "Leave," Giannina said, her voice shaking with anger. "I will," Megan replied, holding out the envelope. "But I thought you should have this. A little parting gift from Milo and me. Consider it a professional courtesy." Reluctantly, as if under a spell, Giannina reached out and took the envelope. She opened the clasp and pulled out a stack of documents bearing the official Albuquerque Holdings legal letterhead. It was a drafted contract. Her eyes scanned the bold text at the top. "Dissolution of assets and marital separation strategy." "Read page 3, darling," Megan whispered poisonously. Giannina's eyes darted down the page. Upon the finalization of the Bonomo shipping merger integration, estimated 6 months post-nuptials, Party A, Duilio Albuquerque, will initiate uncontested divorce proceedings against Party B, Giannina Olson. Party B will be sequestered to the predetermined property and stripped of all voting rights in Bonomo assets. At the bottom of the page, clearly visible, were Duilio's unmistakable, sharp signature and Christoph Paulsen's notary stamp. The air vanished from the room. The vibrant colours of the gallery washed out to grey. The physical pain in her chest was so acute Giannina thought her ribs might splinter. It was exactly what Megan had warned her about. The kisses, the whispered promises in the dark, the fierce protectiveness. It was all a strategy. A way to keep her docile while he secured the merger and planned her disposal. She was just a line item. Again. "He's ruthless, Giannina," Megan said, her voice dropping all pretense of mockery, sounding almost pitying. "He plays to win, and you were just a pawn on his board." The envelope slipped from Giannina's numb fingers, scattering the damning documents across the polished concrete floor. She didn't look at Jaylin, who was rushing over with a concerned expression. She simply turned and ran. She pushed through the glass doors of the gallery, bursting out into the torrential rain. The cold water shocked her system, mingling with the hot tears streaming down her face. She practically collided with a black sedan pulling up to the curb. The door flew open and Duilio stepped out, looking frantic, his suit jacket soaked in seconds. "Giannina, thank God, I'm so sorry. There was a crisis at the office. Milo..." He stopped. He saw the absolute devastation, the shattering betrayal in her eyes. He reached for her, his hands coming up to cup her face. Giannina recoiled violently, slapping his hands away as if they burned her. "Don't touch me!" she screamed over the roar of the rain and passing traffic. "Giannina, what happened? What's wrong?" Duilio demanded, panic lacing his voice, stepping forward. "I saw the exit strategy, Duilio!" she sobbed, backing away, wrapping her arms around herself to hold her shattered pieces together. "The dissolution papers. 6 months, right? Keep the stupid girl entertained in your bed until you bleed my father dry, and then throw her away." Duilio froze, genuine confusion warring with dread on his face. "What dissolution papers? Giannina, I have no idea what you're talking about. I haven't signed—" "Megan gave them to me. They have your signature, Duilio." She turned away, flagging down a passing yellow cab. "Giannina, stop! It's a lie! Milo is working for your father. He forged—" Duilio lunged forward, grabbing her wrist. She looked back at him, her wet hair plastered to her pale face, her eyes hollow and dead. It was the exact look she had worn the night she arrived at his door, only this time, he was the monster she was running from. "My father said you needed a wife to secure your empire," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I was so stupid, I actually thought you wanted me." She wrenched her arm out of his grasp, slid into the back seat of the cab, and slammed the door. Duilio stood frozen in the pouring rain, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles around his feet, helplessly watching the tail lights of the cab disappear into the dark, swallowed by the city that had just cost him everything. The yellow cab smelled of stale smoke and rain, speeding through the neon-slicked streets of Los Angeles, carrying Giannina away from the only place that had ever felt like home. She huddled in the corner of the cracked leather seat, her arms wrapped tightly around her midsection as if physically holding her shattered ribs together. The forged dissolution papers felt like a lead weight in her soaked purse. She didn't go back to the Malibu estate. She couldn't bear to see his things, to smell his cologne on the pillows, or to look at the grand staircase where she had foolishly believed she was walking toward a real future. Instead, she gave the driver the address of a modest, unassuming boutique hotel in West Hollywood, paid with the last of the cash she had in her clutch, and checked in under the name G.O. Once inside the sterile beige room, the adrenaline that had fueled her escape evaporated. Giannina slid down the back of the locked door until she hit the carpet, pulling her knees to her chest and finally let herself scream. It was a raw, agonizing sound, muffled only by her hands. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. Her father had warned her. Megan had warned her. Duilio was a shark, a man who traded in human leverage, and she had handed him her heart on a silver platter, gift-wrapped in a prenuptial agreement. Miles away, the Albuquerque Holdings skyscraper was ablaze with light, a beacon of fury in the stormy night. Duilio had not gone home. He strode onto the executive floor, his suit still damp, his eyes entirely black with a rage so profound it made his security detail step back in fear. He threw open the double doors to his office where Christoph was frantically typing at his computer, surrounded by empty coffee cups. "Did you find her?" Christoph asked, standing up immediately. "No," Duilio snarled, pacing the length of the room like a caged panther. "She got in a cab. She's gone, Christoph. She looked at me like I was the devil himself." "Duilio, we have a massive breach." "I don't give a damn about the breach," Duilio roared, sweeping a stack of files off his desk. They scattered across the floor like dead leaves. He braced his hands on the mahogany, hanging his head, his breathing ragged. "I don't care about the money. I don't care about the Bonomo fleet. Milo and Megan handed her a forged dissolution contract. They made her believe I was throwing her away in 6 months. Christoph froze. "A forged—" "Duilio, that's incredibly illegal. If they forged your signature and my notary stamp, that crosses the line from corporate espionage to federal fraud." Duilio lifted his head, and the raw devastation in his eyes was instantly replaced by something terrifyingly cold and precise. It was the look of a man who was about to burn the world to the ground. "Get my private investigators on the line. I want every hotel, every art gallery, every flight out of LAX monitored. I need to know where my wife is," Duilio commanded, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. Then get the forensic accounting team. We are going to dismantle Milo Thomas. And after we ruin him, we are going to tear Camille Bonomo's legacy apart piece by piece. For the next 48 hours, Duilio did not sleep. He became a machine fueled purely by vengeance and a desperate, gnawing terror that he had lost Giannina forever. The forensic team traced the massive capital flight initiated by Milo directly back to accounts controlled by Camille Bonomo. It was a clumsy maneuver, born of Camille's arrogance and Milo's greed. Camille had essentially stolen from his own subsidiary to tank Albuquerque Holdings stock, hoping to force Duilio out before the merger was finalized. But Duilio's primary focus was the forgery. He dispatched a security team to Megan Massey's upscale PR firm. When Duilio walked into her corner office unannounced, the smug satisfaction on Megan's face melted into sheer, visceral panic. "Duilio, you can't just barge in here." "Sit down, Megan," Duilio said softly, locking the door behind him. He walked over to her desk and placed a small, silver digital recorder on the glass surface. "I have a team of federal investigators currently raiding Milo Thomas's apartment." Duilio lied smoothly, never breaking eye contact. "They have already found the Eastern European shell accounts. In about 10 minutes, they will find the digital trail of the forged legal documents you handed my wife. The penalty for corporate fraud and forging a licensed notary seal is 10 to 15 years in federal prison." Megan paled, her manicured hands trembling. I didn't forge it. Milo did. Camille paid him to do it. They wanted her away from you so you wouldn't have the Bonomo heir. So you just delivered the weapon," Duilio said, his voice laced with disgust. "You are going to confess to this on tape, Megan. You are going to detail exactly how Milo forged the document and how Camille ordered it. If you do, I will let the feds handle you gently. If you refuse, I will personally spend every dime of my fortune ensuring you never see the outside of a cell." Megan sobbed, reaching for the recorder. With the confession secured and the financial data compiled, Duilio had the ammunition. But the victory felt entirely hollow. He stared out his office window at the sprawling city. He had his empire. He had his revenge. But his bed was empty, and the only woman who had ever made him feel human was out there, thinking he had betrayed her. His phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. "Albuquerque," he answered roughly. "You look like hell on the news," a woman's voice said. It took him a moment to place it. Jalen Josephson, the gallery owner. Duilio's grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. "Where is she, Jalen?" "She's heartbroken, you arrogant bastard," Jalen snapped. "She's been hiding in my spare room for 2 days. She won't eat, she won't paint. If you really did what she thinks you did, I'll kill you myself before I let you near her." "I didn't," Duilio said, his voice cracking with a vulnerability that shocked him. "I swear to God, Jalen, I didn't. Let me see her. Let me prove it." Jalen sighed heavily. "You have 10 minutes. After that, I'm taking her to the airport." Jalen's loft was a chaotic explosion of colour and light located above her gallery. When Duilio walked in, he felt entirely out of place in his tailored suit, holding a manila folder that contained the fate of his marriage. Giannina was sitting on a faded velvet sofa by the window, staring blankly at the street below. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, her hair pulled into a messy knot, her face pale and drawn. When she heard his footsteps, she stiffened, but she didn't turn around. "Jalen told me you were coming," Giannina said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "I told her to tell you to leave. I have nothing to say to you, Duilio. The lawyers can handle the rest." Duilio felt a physical pain in his chest, sharper than any blade. He walked slowly across the creaking floorboards, stopping a few feet away from her. He didn't try to touch her. He knew if she pulled away from him again, it would break him. "I didn't come to force you back, Giannina," Duilio said softly, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. "I came to clear my name." He gently tossed the manila folder onto the coffee table in front of her. "Open it." Giannina finally looked at him. Her eyes, usually so vibrant and expressive, were dull, haunted by the betrayal. She looked from him to the folder, hesitating before her trembling fingers reached out and flipped it open. Inside were close-up macro photographs of the signatures on the dissolution papers Megan had given her, side by side with Duilio's actual signature. There were heavily highlighted reports from forensic analysts pointing out the microscopic hesitations in the pen strokes, proving it was a machine-replicated forgery. Next to it was the digital routing data from Christoph's notary stamp, proving it had been accessed via a remote server hack. "What is this?" she whispered, her brow furrowing. Duilio pulled out his phone, pressed play on an audio file, and set it on the table. Megan's tearful, panicked voice filled the quiet loft. "I didn't forge it. Milo did. Camel paid him to do it. They wanted her away from you." Janina stopped breathing. She stared at the phone as the recording finished, the silence in the loft suddenly deafening. Her mind spun, struggling to reconcile the horror of the last 48 hours with the absolute proof sitting in front of her. "Your father knew that if we stayed together, if the marriage became real, he would lose his leverage over the company. And over you," Duilio explained gently, taking a half step closer. "He hired Milo to bleed my company dry, and when he realized that wasn't enough to make me break the marriage, he used Megan to break you. He wanted you to believe I was exactly the monster he is." A tear slipped down Giannina's cheek, splashing onto the forensic report. The magnitude of her father's cruelty was staggering. He hadn't just tried to ruin a business deal, he had meticulously planned to break her spirit, to convince her that she was unlovable, that she was only ever a transactional object. "I believed it," Giannina choked out, burying her face in her hands. "I believed them, Duilio, because it made sense, because that's how my world has always worked. I'm so sorry." Duilio crossed the final distance between them, dropping to his knees in front of the sofa. He reached out, gently pulling her hands away from her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Don't apologize," he said fiercely, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "I am the one who proposed a cold, calculated contract. I gave them the ammunition to use against us. But Giannina, look at me." He waited until her tear-filled eyes met his. "There is no exit strategy. There is no timeline. You are my wife, not for the merger, not for the board, but because the thought of living in that massive house without you makes me want to burn it to the ground." Giannina let out a shuddering breath, staring into the face of the man she loved. The icy CEO was gone, replaced by a man laying his soul bare on the floor of a dusty art studio. She reached out, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, and pulled him forward, pressing her lips to his. It wasn't a desperate kiss of possession, nor a fleeting touch for the cameras. It was a promise. It was an anchor. "We need to end this," Giannina whispered against his lips, a new, fierce resolve hardening in her chest. "We need to end him." Duilio smiled, a dangerous, beautiful sight. "I was hoping you'd say that." 3 hours later, the boardroom of Bonomo Shipping was a scene of absolute chaos. Camille Bonomo sat at the head of the table, looking smug and victorious, surrounded by his loyal board members. The heavy mahogany doors slammed open. Duilio strode in, flanked by Christoph and a team of corporate lawyers. But it was the woman walking beside him that made the room fall dead silent. Giannina looked immaculate, dressed in a sharp-tailored black suit, her chin held high, her hand firmly clasped in Duilio's. She didn't look like a pawn. She looked like a queen stepping onto the board to claim her crown. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Camille bellowed, half standing, his eyes darting nervously to his daughter. "Giannina, what are you doing with this man? You thought your forged documents worked, father?" Giannina said, her voice ringing out, clear and unwavering. It was a voice that commanded the room. "You thought you could buy my heartbreak the way you buy shipping lanes?" Camille blanched, sinking back into his leather chair. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Christoph stepped forward, dropping a massive stack of bound files onto the center of the table. "Gentlemen of the board," Christoph announced, "in these files you will find irrefutable proof that your CEO, Camille Bonomo, conspired with an external consultant, Milo Thomas, to embezzle $50 million from your own subsidiary accounts in an attempt to sabotage the Albuquerque merger." The board members erupted into shouts, grabbing for the files. Duilio leaned over the table, bracing his hands on the polished wood, staring dead into Camille's terrified eyes. "You violated the terms of our merger. You engaged in federal fraud. I have already handed the evidence over to the SEC and the FBI. Milo Thomas is currently in custody, and he is singing like a bird." "You can't do this!" Camille spat, his face purple. "This is my company, my legacy." "It was your company," Duilio corrected coldly. As of 10 minutes ago, Albuquerque Holdings executed a hostile buyout of your plummeting shares. You don't own a majority anymore, Camille. You don't own anything. Giannina stepped forward, looking down at the man who had controlled her, manipulated her, and tried to destroy her only chance at happiness. You said Duilio needed an anchor, Giannina said softly, her eyes filled with pity rather than anger. You were right, but he didn't need your fleet. He just needed me. You are finished, father. Do not ever contact me again. She turned her back on him, the sound of Camel's desperate, angry shouting fading away as Duilio placed a protective hand on her lower back, guiding her out of the boardroom and into their new life. The Malibu estate was unrecognizable. The clinical, sterile perfection Duilio had once insisted upon had been entirely disrupted by the chaotic, vibrant warmth of Giannina's presence. Canvases leaned against the walls in the hallway, smelling faintly of linseed oil. A pair of her paint-splattered sneakers sat haphazardly next to his polished Italian leather Oxfords by the front door. The house was no longer a museum. It was a home. The corporate world had moved on. Camel Bonomo had been formally indicted and ousted in disgrace, his shipping empire quietly and efficiently absorbed into Albuquerque Holdings. Milo Thomas was awaiting trial, and Megan Massey's PR firm had crumbled overnight once the rumors of her involvement in corporate sabotage hit the social circuits. Giannina stood on the terrace, a mug of tea warming her hands, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. The sunset was painting the sky in brilliant strokes of cadmium orange and violet. She wasn't hiding anymore. Later that week, Giannina Albuquerque would be debuting her first fully public gallery showing, hosted by Jay Lin. She had finally stepped out of the shadows. She heard the heavy slide of the glass door behind her, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a solid, warm chest. Duilio pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck, inhaling deeply. "You're home early," she murmured, leaning her head back against his shoulder. "The board can manage without me for an afternoon," Duilio replied, his voice a low rumble. "I have more pressing matters to attend to." He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a folded, slightly singed piece of paper. Giannina recognized it instantly. It was the original pre-nuptial agreement, the cold, calculated contract they had signed in Christoph's office what felt like a lifetime ago. "I found this in the safe," Duilio said, his tone entirely serious. "It outlines asset division, public appearances, and separate bedrooms." Giannina turned in his arms, wrapping her arms loosely around his neck, a playful smile touching her lips. "I believe we breached Clause 4 quite comprehensively, Mr. Albuquerque." Duilio's eyes softened, entirely devoted. "It's a terrible contract. Too many loopholes. No protections against falling completely, hopelessly in love with the other party." He walked over to the outdoor fire pit, which was burning merrily against the evening chill, and tossed the document into the flames. They stood together, watching the paper curl, blacken, and turn to ash, carried away by the sea breeze. "No more contracts," Duilio said, turning back to her, taking her face in his hands. "No clauses, no exit strategies, just you and me for the rest of our lives." "Just us," Giannina whispered, her heart overflowing. He kissed her, sweet and deep, under the twilight sky. She had arrived at his door a broken pawn, seeking a transaction to escape her cage. But in the ruthless, solitary shark, she had found her protector, her equal, and her truest love. Giannina's journey from a terrified heiress trading one cage for another to a fiercely independent artist and equal partner proves that love can bloom in the most barren, calculated environments. Duilio, a man who measured his life in acquisitions, learned that the most valuable thing he could ever hold couldn't be bound by a contract. They dismantled the toxic empire built by her father, replacing it with a foundation of profound trust, raw honesty, and unbreakable devotion. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most transactional beginnings can ignite the most passionate, authentic loves. If you love Giannina and Duilio's intense emotional journey from a fake marriage to true love, please like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and hit that subscribe button for more gripping audio stories. Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below.